Right, and then I'm gonna share my screen as well. And then I got my MATLAB and I get my slides. Okay. Number 3 today. It's been cold.
Oh, yeah.
Right. It's
Today
cold.
was better, but yesterday was really hard.
Yeah. I got a friend at the Purdue University, and it was pretty cold there, obviously. And he got a video of himself, like topless and running around, like 8 a.m. in the morning or so. Yeah, that's awesome, right? Yeah. But yeah, it was cold, so not very. Hopefully, it's gonna getting better.
Must be like 40 this week.
Oh yeah, well that's nice. Yeah, we'll take that.
Which is funny, they're like, yeah, you shouldn't go outside for more than 10 minutes. Like,
Right.
yeah, that's not gonna happen.
Okay, so let me see which one I'm choosing here. Now the folks online. That's two. HDMI. It's getting really short here. Okay, we got some technical issue that I am solving now, so give me a few minutes. Okay, all right. Well, let me see. Okay, so we'll go with this. So if you recall last time, we talked about basically RGB images and how to visualize them, how to bring them into MATLAB, and how to sort of process them in a way that you can get some useful information. Now the processing that we showed last time is fairly rudimentary. There's so many other things you can do with them, but I wanted to basically distinguish. We are going to talk about convolution and spatial filtering today. And last time we are talking about basically pixel by pixel operation. Now, pixel by pixel operation does not really consider the neighboring pixels, the guy next to you. Now, if you think about the way that how our vision works, so our vision really depends on the spatial redundancy, so to speak, how one pixel relates to other pixels to be able to do the recognition, right? So I'll give you an example. For example, a color may not be so important for our vision recognition. If I have a pepper in the image, right, whether it's a green pepper or yellow pepper or red pepper, you're gonna recognize it as a pepper, right? So in those cases, color may be important, but there are situations color isn't so much important, right? Tractor is another example, right? You can have a John Deere tractor, which is green, and you can perfectly have a blue, right? Case New Holland, and that's still a tractor, right? So those are the examples that why we need to consider the spatial relationship of those pixels in a picture. And our cognition is probably a whole lot more in those regard than just the pixel-wise operation. Now, regarding the processing, pixel-wise the operation is so much easier, right? Because it's easy to code them. You come up with a rule for each pixel, and then you repeated it like millions of times across all those pixels, right? But this, when you start to deal with the spatial relationship among pixels, it turns out it's very difficult because there's so many possibilities basically, right? You can look at the pixels next to you, the above, below, or to the left, to the right, and then you also need to consider like really how many layers I have to go considering that as my neighboring pixels, right? You can go 2 layers, 3 layers, 4 layers, those kind of stuff. So what I'm trying to tell you is it's hard. Okay, so that's exactly why it's become difficult for the computer vision. Is there's not much good algorithm, and there's not much good kind of sort of like semantic description of the neighborhood, the spatial relationships among those pixels. Okay, so now we're going to talk about spatial filtering. Now, spatial filtering is the center for the convolutional neural networks, but it is nothing new. So the spatial filtering of image processing has been there for 40 years, 50 years already. Okay, so we are not really looking at like the cutting edge technologies. It is a very, very significant building block for convolutional neural network that you want to know. And once you know, then you will be able to construct the different pieces, right? So if you look at the whole convolutional neural network, you got convolutional layers, you got activation layers, you got pooling layers, you got another convolutional layers. You repeated that unit for a couple of times until at the back end you got the fully connected layers. So fully connected layer is the one that we showed before. So those are just kind of you flatten all your image into one row, and then you have another layer, and those 2 layers got fully connected. Every possible connection that's out there, and then that's your whole convnets, right? So this spatial filtering is a significant part of it, and we're going to talk about it. We're not going to go very deep into all the mathematics, and there's a whole suite of theories behind the spatial filtering, and it is very close. I just let you know, it is very close to signal processing. It is very, very, very close to Fourier transform. We're not going to talk about it. So you will see from here to there, you're going to see some examples. I might kind of touch a little bit, but we're not going to talk about in the Fourier transform, okay? So, it is very straightforward. Now, I show you, if you look at the picture there, so the bigger grids represents an image, okay? And then the small grid, in this case is 3 by 3, and that is our filter. So that is how you're gonna run your convolution operation, okay? And then what you do is you overlay your filter to the first position of your image or pixel, right? So there's a center pixel there, that's your gray pixel. And then you do a convolutional operation. So the convolutional operation is very easy to understand. So what you do is you do a pixel-wise or elemental-wise multiplication of all those pixels, and then you add them up. Okay, so there's 9 multiplications, and then you got the results of those multiplication, and then you add them together, and then that is the results that represents your center pixel there. Okay, is that kind of clear enough? So the folks online, is that description clear enough? Okay, so that's actually your convolution operation. Now you got the results of the first pixel, and then you move to the next pixel, okay, and you repeat the same process, 9 multiplications and 8 additions, get them together, and you got results, and that's your second pixel results, and you move to the next. You go through the rows, and then coming back the second row at the beginning, and you move that second row, and then go back and forth till you kind of cover the entire image, okay? So now you can see this is a very, very computational intensive process. Okay, so I will tell you why. Now, if you look at if we have an image which is, pick an image that's not really high in resolution, 250 by 250. Okay, and we decided that we are using a 3 by 3 film. All right, so now each convolution, so each of those pixels, each convolution, you're gonna have 9 multiplication and 8 addition, right? Right, so that's the number of operation you're gonna do for each of those pixels. Now you're gonna do it 250 by 250 times. So basically the number of operation that you can do is 250 times 250, right? So that's your roughly, you're not quite to get 250. You got like 248 because those two edge rows you're not gonna do it. Times 9. So that's the number of multiplication you're gonna do for this for go through the entire image once, right? And this is not the end of the story yet because you have additions everywhere, and that's 250 by 250 times 8 because there's 9 numbers. You got 8 additions together, right? So very, very slow. And so 250 by 250 is really low resolution images, right? So today's standards, this is really 2500. So you can see how many operations you're gonna get for this kind of operation, right? So it is not so. We talk about 3 by 3, okay now, but you can design filters which is 5 by 5, 7 by 7, 9 by 9, 11 by 11. Now you may notice all those are odd numbers, and there's a reason for using odd numbers. And why? Because if you have a 3 by 3 or 5 by 5, you always have a center pixel, right? So this guy right here, that's your center pixel. And you can identify the same center pixel if it's 5 by 5 or if it's 7 by 7. You will have trouble if you use an even number filter. If you use a 2 by 2 or 4 by 4, right? So you gotta use so this is the reason why odd number filters are very, very common. And normally those are square. It's by convention. I haven't seen many research come out to say I'm gonna use a rectangular filter, which you can. There's no problem. You can do that. But normally people wouldn't do. It's always like 3 by 3, 5 by 5, 7 by 7, square odd number template. Okay. All right. So you get some idea about the let's see. Let me share my video here. Start video so that these folks can see me, myself, and the board. So the board, that's the number of operations that you're gonna do for the convolution for a fairly small sized image. Okay. All right. I'm gonna move to the next slide. Let's see what's next. Okay, so yeah, again, so different names. If you go through the literature, don't be surprised if you see, they call them filters, masks, and kernels, and they sometimes say templates and windows even. Okay, so it looks like a window, right? So those are all show up in literature. So just don't be confused. Sometimes different jargons means the same thing. Okay. And we already said the neighborhood is usually square and odd sized. So 3 by 3, 5 by 5, 7 by 5, 7 by 7. Now I know that you guys may not like that equation, right? So that equation is a mathematical, formula for the convolution. Okay, so the convolution is actually, so that is, there's actually two things that you need to know. One is a correlation. Okay, the other is a convolution. Now, let's keep it here, and then coming back, when we try to make a difference between them, and they are actually, pretty much the same, particularly in the image processing that you are using a symmetrical filter. Okay, so if the filter isn't symmetrical, you're gonna, when you reverse it, there's some consequences. But here we are all using symmetrical ones, so it's actually very almost the same. All right, so again, here is a numerical example of it. So I've done 5 by 5, so we are using the average window. So again, average window is, it's straightforward. It's very, very intuitive. If it's 3 by 3, you got 3 by 3 window, and then all ones in it, and then you put a 1/9 in the front to normalize it. And because otherwise, if you don't have 1/9, then you got your numbers, results kind of way over your range. So you don't want to do that. So that's the reason why it's there. And then, so, if you wanted to know how the operation is done, right? So right now, this 3 by 3 is overlaid on, this, this area. Then you're gonna have, 1 times 1, you can read it at home. 1 times 1 plus 8 times 1 plus 15 times 1, and et cetera, and then divided by 9. And then you come up with something is 13, okay? So this is, a couple of things that we want to know. Number one, so it's called average filter because it averages, right? And you can see it is very intuitive why this is an average filter. Is because you take all ones, if there are extreme values, extreme high values or low values in those 3 by 3 area, it's gonna be averaged by other pixels, right? Because you add them up and you divide it by 9, right? So if your signal, you can think about, if your signal is, if you have a high, they have a low or something, and then when you filter it, and it's almost, it's gonna this bump here, it's gonna average it, right? So that its highs and lows isn't really that striking. So that's the reason why it's called an average, because it's trying to average highs and lows tends to cancel out, right? So that's number one. And then number two, the second observation here is something called a padding. We got a 5 by 5 mini image here, right? And then when you do the convolution by a 3 by 3 window size, you can, so you're gonna have, so what you can do is, all right, so this is 5 by 5, okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so you do it, so this is the first position you can do, right? Yes. And then you move over, and then this is your second position you can do. And then you move over here, and this is really your last position that you can do. You cannot move over any further because then this column doesn't have any images to be convolved with, right? And then you have to quit and then moving to the other, the second row, and then this is your 9 by 9, right? And then move. So your starting image is 5 by 5. And then your filter, so this is your image. Your filter is 3 by 3. And what is your results? Your results is gonna be 3 by 3. Okay? So every time that you run a convolution operation, image actually shrinks depending on how large is your window size, right? Now this has a consequence. It doesn't have a whole lot of consequence here because we normally for the conventional image processing, we only do once. We only do the convolution once, and then we call it done. Okay, so if you have an image which is 1,000 pixels, you may lose a few on the edge, but that's not going to cause you a whole lot of problem. It will be a problem for the convolutional neural network because this operation has been run maybe 10 times, maybe 20 times, maybe 50 times. And then you can see it's gonna keep shrinking. And even though that you have a fairly large image to start with, and after 50 times of losing the edge pixels, then you're gonna get pretty small. Okay, so that's one of the consequences that you have. And so that's the reason why that you see there is two convolution operations get distinguished in ConvNets. One is called the same convolution. Okay, it's the same. So the option is the same. You will see that when you specify neural network structure, it says the convolution is the same. And then the second one is valid. Okay, so if I choose valid, means I don't do anything about it. I will let it to shrink. So that's a valid true convolution. So it means that over the time, when you get deep into the neural network, the image gets really shrinking, keep shrinking. Now, same means that I wanted to keep the same dimension. Now, how are you going to keep the same dimension, right? Then, one way that you can do is you pad it. So you intentionally, artificially add a layer of, right? So before, your original image is 5 by 5, but I had it to 7 by 7, right? So these are, let me just draw it here so that you. And again, all these are very intuitive, right? So I pad it. So I pad it such that I can actually line my 3 by 3 here, so that my center pixel is the first corner pixel for my result. So if I pad it at 7 by 7, then I get the same convolution result, which is 5 by 5, right? And then next time I can pad it again, and then make the convolution, and then you still shrink to 5 to 5. So if you use a same convolution, then you know that your image is never going to shrink, which sometimes is good. Okay, and you have a choice. How are you going to pad it, right? Now, and keep in mind we padded once, so we only have one layer of padding because we choose 3 by 3. Now, had we chosen 5 by 5, then you're gonna add 2 layers. If it's 7 by 7, you're gonna add 3 layers, right? So the more the wider the window of the filter, more padding you have to do for the same convolution, okay? And the choice of it is normally we're gonna just do a 0 padding, so you put zeros around, okay? And this is perfectly fine, okay? But there are other ways to do the padding. One way is you're gonna do a mirroring. This is again, it's probably outside of what you really need to know. This is there's a little bit of math behind it. But if this is fx, okay, so fx is your original image, okay? And then 0 padding is what's on the upper right corner there. You see you got the zeros, goes both ways, right? So this is the signal, and then you got a 0. So that's the 0 padding. But there's other ways. This one is a periodic padding. Okay, so you assume that your image is actually a sample of an infinite periodic function, and then you kind of move. In this case, you're gonna move this column of pixel to here and pad it. Okay, and then you can also do a semantic padding, and then there's all different ways that you can do, but in the modern convolutional neural networks, if you use the same padding, always pad it with 0. Okay, so that's what most of the people would do. All right, I'm gonna skip that. I'm gonna want to introduce this one. So I have a checkerboard, a 2x2 checkerboard. So the original image is this. Okay, so what I want you to see is how sharp the edge of that image is, right? So the transition between black and white and black is sharp. Okay, so if you look at, if you blow it up, if you look at the images, okay. So this is where the line is. Okay, so all these are zeros, okay? Zeros, because it's black, zeros, right? And then all these are ones, because it's white. Okay, so I decided to use zeros and ones representation so that's a little bit easier. And you understand that if I use 255, it's, you know, express the exact same meaning, okay? So, you know, the transition between 0 and 1, you know, 1 to 0, it's very sharp, right? So it's a sharp edge. Now, if I run it through a 11 by 11 window, and then you can see the edge become a little bit blurred, right? Because you create transitions. Now, again, this is straightforward because, you know, if I have a 11 by 11, you know, it's all ones, right? Once I get it here, okay, that's a subset of the image that is 11 by 11 area. And then you still got all zeros there. But as soon as I move one row down here, and I got my bottom line that hits that 1, and then you start to do the average, and then this middle one that you're gonna write here, that's a fraction number, right? So as you move down to include more ones in your window, and your number is gonna become bigger and bigger until, you know, the entire thing gets merged into 1, and then you get a 1. You got your results is 1. So you create really, you know, your result image. You create a lot of transition values between zeros and ones, and then that's how you get to see. You know, you don't see this very well here yet. Resolution is high, but you can clearly see it if I have my window that is very large, right? 31 by 31, the 51 by 51, and that's because, you know, you get a whole lot of transition happening along your edge. Okay. So this is traditionally, this is a very important observation to make for average filter because you trying to blur the edges. What does that mean? So from a signal processing standpoint, so if I have to say, you know, if you have a signal, okay, and then your signal got a noise in it, usually signal is a low frequency component, and your noise is much higher frequency component in your spectrum. Okay, so edge certainly is a signal. It's an important signal. You know, a lot of the vision, it turns out that our vision works around the edge. So we detect edges. So the human eye detect edges to make the identifications. But this edge is, you know, it smooths the edges. Means it is since the edge is a high frequency component in your image, which means this is a low pass filter. Okay, so it's trying to smooth out it. It's trying to remove, you know, it's not remove, it's just the sharp edge is trying to smooth it. And this makes sense because, so average filter all once is a low pass filter. And the reason for that is, you know, folks have been learning signal processing. You're gonna like this. So this is the response function of your low pass filter, right? All ones, and then outside all zeros. So this is your window size, right? H/2 and H/2, right? And then your response is 1. So right? And then you extend that to the two-dimensional. Then this is your filter shape in the spatial domain or in the time domain. Okay, what is the Fourier transform of this box function? Still remember? Some of you must learn this already. Many of you didn't.
What is it? Fourier transform.
Yes, it's a sinc function.
Yeah.
That's right. So the Fourier transform of this guy is a sinc function. Okay, so sinc function looks like this. You got a little bit leak through, right? And then this is F, right? And this is T. So these two guys are Fourier pairs. So a lot of the low pass signal allowed to pass because of this, and a lot of the high frequency component, which is the edge, got suppressed because you don't have much leakage through it, right? So you got to filter it out. And then also, if I have an Fx, which is my image or which is my the signal that I want to work with, convolve with a Gx or Hx. Let's use the Hx. I use the H here. Okay, convolved with my Hx, which is my window, 3x3, 5x5 window. This is the convolution. So convolution is exactly what we do. Element-wise add, multiplication, add them together. And this is equivalent to what? So the Fx, which is the Fourier transform of this time domain or spatial domain function, times Hx, right? So Hx is the Fourier transform of my window function. All right, so if you remember, so the convolution got really this nice feature that if you do, so this is a way that you can avoid that complex mathematical operation. You use, convolution in the time domain becomes multiplication in the spatial domain or in the frequency domain, right? So you guys look a little bit lost, but it's okay. Yes, Jeremy, you're gonna say something? Yes, this is convolution or the symbol for convolution operation. So it doesn't, yeah. So, but you can see that if these two are the same thing. If I do a Fourier transform of these two, multiply them together, and then do an inverse Fourier transform, I got the exact same thing. Okay, so this has been very, very important. When I learned image processing, this was like the core of it. Okay, so we need to kind of make sense of why this is so, right? So why you got the box function in the time domain, and this is a low filter, low pass filter because of these two other Fourier pairs. Okay, but you guys don't really need to learn a whole lot of details of this. All you need to know is edge is a sharp is a high frequency component, and this average is really trying to suppress that edge. And there's a lot of other filters, which is high pass filter, really strengthen that edge. Okay, and those filters are used a whole lot more in convolutional neural network than this average filter that we use. And we're gonna see some of it, okay? So I'm gonna let you see what you don't need to go through this. So this is another example, right? So a very typical example for MATLAB. You got an image which got quite sharp edges, right? And if you go over the 3x3, 7x7, and 11x11, you can see how it gets more and more blurred, right? And everything can be explained by mathematics because if I have this window wider and wider, what does that mean? It means your sink gets narrower and narrower, right? So your sink becomes narrow. So which really trying to preserve the low frequency component in your image. Okay. All right. So that's the average, right? So and then Gaussian is another. So Gaussian isn't really like this, right? This is the ideal response the Gaussian is more of the cross section of it. Looks like a Gaussian function, right? So Gaussian is normal, right? We still remember the normal function, normal distribution, right? So it looks, it's a little bit bad. It behaves bad. Okay, so it's still low pass because you still trying to average a lot, but it's better than the our kind of all ones spatial filtering thing. Okay, and you get two parameters because Gaussian standard Gaussian got two parameters. One is mean, one is sigma, right? But this is centered around the 0, so it doesn't really mean. The mean of the Gaussian isn't really a parameter. It's more of the spread of it, right? That controls the window size. It's wider or it's lower, narrower. Okay. Now we're gonna take. You don't like this, right? So there's a lot of some mathematics. Don't worry about it. But I want you to look at this. So Laplace is a high pass filter, and you can see what the high pass filter tries to do. Okay, so if I have a window that is just like my 3x3 average filter, this time I replace those values. All right, you can see what it's trying to do. It's trying to contrast its the current pixel of interest with its neighboring pixel. You see, -4 or 1 right? Or if you also look at the diagonal, -8 in the middle, and all 1 down. Now, if I have this pixel in the original image, I have this pixel that is vastly different from surrounding pixels. And this would be, this pixel after the filtering is going to be accentuated, right? It's going to be accentuated even more. As opposed to if you get a smooth, a smooth patch, and this guy happens to run, overlay on it, then this one's going to be 0. Because you get all those the same. That's 4 times the same -4, and then cancel out. That becomes 0, right? So if you have a very smooth patch of the image, and then if you want to overlay this one on that patch, it's going to suppress everything. So that's the reason why it is a high pass filter, because you're trying to accentuate the difference. All right. So it's again intuitive, very very intuitive, right? Even though there's a lot of math behind it. Okay. And then so we have log. So it's a Laplace of Gaussian, and so it's a derivative of this Gaussian. And this is also, you can see, this is also high pass. How do I know? Because you can see, the central pixel, try to contrast the central pixel and its surrounding pixel. And the same is here, right? The central pixel, and then you got all surrounding pixel. All right? And it makes sense, right? So this is the high pass. All right, so this is what the results look like, right? So if I have original, and if I run through the Gaussian 3x3 again, Gaussian is still a low pass filter. It's trying to smooth it, and then so you see the result. But if I run Laplace and log, so it really accentuates the edges, right? You can see the contrast here, that mass apparel and the background. It's really it's match, right? And then it tends to accentuate it, being able to detect it. Okay, and it turns out that plays a lot in our, it's very innate of the vision, how the human vision works, is to look at edges. Okay. All right. So, are there any questions up to this point? So we look at the filters. We look at the low pass filters. I'm gonna put it in low pass and high pass filter, or average filter, and then the filters. This is the high pass filter that are trying to accentuate the edges. Yes, Jason. Laplace is a high pass. So if you look at this, so this is a Laplace operation. Okay, so you guys, this is discrete version of derivatives. You guys should it's easy to understand, right? So derivative means I'm here and I make a difference between my neighbor and divided by the distance between us. But since this is a discrete type image, right? So the neighbor is 1 pixel different. That's the reason why you can see that the delta t or delta x, right? On the denominator. Okay. So, all right. So keep in mind every time you see like a blurring effect, that's low pass filter. Every time that you see the edge being eccentric, being brought up, that's a high pass filter because edge is a high frequency component, right? So, if you look at signal T, ft, right? So this is a sort of low pass because it didn't change much. Okay. Now, if I have, if this is like the high frequency component, right? It changes a lot. And this is something that you see edge. This will show up as an edge if this is the image, because you go low, suddenly high, and then low, and that's your edge, right there. Okay, and that can be detected by by this filter. All right, so yeah. Laplace and log, if you look at the way it's designed, it's really trying to look for all directions. It doesn't, there's no directionality with these two filters. Now, there are filters that can just looking at horizontal edges or vertical edges, and these are your Prewitt and Sobel ones, right? And this again, I'm gonna use the Sobel as an example. This makes sense, right? So again, very, very intuitive. If you overlay this guy with your image, all right? Okay. Here, if the image, if this guy, the template, is hovering around here, it's gonna be all zeros because plus and minus cancels out, and they are all zeros, right? It's only gonna have an effect when that moves to here, right? Because then you have zeros aligned on the top row and ones aligned at the bottom row, and you produce a signal, right? So, and this one, in particular, this one on the left is not going to be responsive when this overlay is here. Yes, makes sense? Because this is the vertical edge, and this guy is specifically designed for horizontal edge, right? And this guy is for the edge, right? So it's very, very intuitive. Why it is 1-2-1, it's not 1-3-1 or 3-10-3. And there's a whole lot of math behind it, and the people tried a lot, and there is foundations behind it, but mathematically and the intuitively it's not really that hard to grasp the concepts. Okay, all right. So this is how you see it, right? So again the same cameraman, but this guy, if you run that template through the image, and this recognize a lot of horizontal edges, right? Because you can see all these on the background, when the vertical edge is being captured by the other filter, and you can see all the vertical edges gets right? So you wanted to because these convolutional operations really good at detect the edges, and you already see it, right? And then you can see when you have the first convolution stage, and then you do another convolutional stage on this one, and you can do many of it, and then it turns out that these edges are what they call kind of lower level features in the image. It's very fun rudimentary features, right? It's not and then once you go over a couple of stages, you get to more advanced features. It can start to abstract a human face, or or, being able to capture, the edges or the features on the human face, right? And then, the distance between eyes, for example, or the landmarks on your face. Seems like, after a couple of layers of convolution, the algorithm would be able to pick up those features, and that is really the basis of convolutional neural network. Why it becomes so, effective in image processing is because of that. Still, keep in mind, this is a very, very computational intensive, right? We already see before, and we only discuss about one layer of convolution. Now you can go through 50 layers, and you can imagine how big that can be, how intensive it is, right? And you are not training just one image, right? So you are training thousands of images. So that expression that we said before, 250 by 250 by 9, and it will be scaled by another factor, which is, maybe 10,000, maybe 12,000 of your training sets. So it is extremely, incredibly computational intensive. So even though, so this is this nice thing about it, right? If you look at the paper, so we'll talk about the convolutional neural network. It starts like I would say 1989 is probably the earliest that you see. All right, but that theory, the theory is already there. But the theory, we can't realize it. You can do all this, mathematical calculations, and it starts to, kind of speculate. Okay, so if I can do this, this is gonna be outcome. But you really can't prove it because computer is not there. Computation isn't there yet. But it's only after we got GPU, we got a lot of workstations, and you got kind of massive computing and FPGA, those type of computation hardware. Then this starts to kind of almost like application becomes blow up, like because you and I, like our researcher, and we got a Holland Computing Center, right? You can start to do some of the research by your own. So, but before really isn't, it's only exists in the theoretical realm. And you can't practice it. But later on, particularly these years, like really after 2015, you see so many applications with this kind of stuff, right? And again, one part of it is that contributes to it is computation. You can realize it. Okay, so that's that, and I got a few others. All right, so this is something again, traditional image processing that you wanted to know. Spatial filter types, right? So there's a low pass filter and a high pass filter, and this is how I know image processing. And then what's the purpose of low pass filter? Right? Suppress noise, right? And then preserve the signal. Right, and then blur, the affected blur the image. All right, and then all if you sum up all those filter components, they sum up to 1. Okay, and then high pass filters, it enhances noise and suppress the signal. But again, this is a little bit misnomer here. Edge is also a signal. It's just a high frequency signal component. Okay, so it's it's very useful to detect the edges and the lines, discontinuities in your image. Okay, so if you have a bigger contrast, the area with bigger contrast, you can detect them with high pass filters, and then normally sum to 0. So if you look at you sum them up, that's 0. Okay, so very, 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 very I doubt how important this is for the application of ConvNets, because the other thing that's important to know is, again, so I use this term a lot. These are hand-engineered features. Now, those filters are already known, right? Now, if I say a Sobel filter, and I know that it is 1, 2, 1, 0, 0, 0, negative 1, negative 2, negative 1. Okay. So if I say Laplace filter, and I know what those fit. So those coefficients are already predetermined. All right. Now, in your convolutional neural network, it isn't so. So you can say I'm gonna have a 3x3 filter in this layer, and I can use 40 of them. But those filter, those coefficients W's are actually trained by your algorithm. It's trained through gradient descent. Okay, so you don't pre-select, so to speak, those W's. And that's again is, that's, you wanted to make a big deal out of it is because, you do not use hand engineered features at all in your convolutional neural network. Everything is figured out by the adaptive, training itself, right? So, this is important. So if you, all you do is kind of define the architecture. This layer I wanted to use 5 by 5, and I'm gonna use 40 of them. And then the second layer, I'm gonna use 100 of them, 5 by 5. And then the third layer, I'm gonna use 200 of them. So you only do that thing, but you do not go in for each of those filters and what are the values of that filter 5 by 5, what are those coefficients? You never do that. You are randomizing, so you, at the beginning of the training, you randomize those, okay? And then you sort of kind of give them random numbers and then let the algorithm gradient descent again, to figure out what should those numbers be in your filter design, okay? So that's not, that's not hand engineered features, right? Yes, Jesselina?
Sorry, I'm asking about.
No, that's okay.
There's this third point in that low pass filters that is blurs the image, and the high pass filter it takes edges and lines in the image. So if I do have an image of a low pass filter and a high pass filter from an original image, but could actually give me more information about what was there actually in the original image.
Yeah, so I don't think that you can gain additional info. So when you capture an image, all the information is already there. You cannot, by processing it, you can accentuate part of it and then try to, intentionally suppress part of it so that, you want it, you can see better what you want to see, for example, edges. But I don't think you are creating new information. By going through the image, you are not going to get the information that's not in the image, in the original. No. Okay. Yeah. So so that's that, and I'm gonna go over some MATLAB code so that you can kind of better see what we're talking about today. Okay. So all right.
I have a quick question.
Can you see my screen? I'm switching to MATLAB now. Okay, great. So I'm gonna use image. Okay, that's because that's what we do a lot for the plants. All right, so I'm gonna image show. So just imrap reading the image, right? And then I gave it a variable name RGB maze because this is a maze. Okay, so this is a maze image. I choose this because this is perfect for this class. Horizontal edges, right? Vertical edges. Okay, so we'll see how that detected. All right, so now RGB got 3 layers, right? So one thing that we didn't talk about is, all the examples that we discussed up to this point, it's the single band image, it's a black and white image, or grayscale image. Okay. So I'm going to, now you can process RGB with these filters, but I'm gonna take an easy route here. I'm gonna compress our original RGB to a single band image, and then I'm gonna process there. Okay, so that's the reason why I use this gray maze. So the function is RGB to gray. That's a built-in MATLAB function, allows you to convert the RGB 3 bands to a single band. Now, instead of, if you can verify the results, instead of having so now it becomes not colorful anymore. It becomes a grayscale, but the edge is still there, right? So that's good. Edge is still there. All right, so now this guy right here, so I call it the HAVG. And then this is the 11 by 11 average filter. All right, and then I have a coefficient in the front 1/1 to 1. You know, 1-to-1 is 11 squared. This is just to normalize it. Okay. Control C. Can I run it? All right. So you can actually double click here. And this is really nice of MATLAB that you can see what's the variable that you created. It's right here. So HAVG, and if I double click, and those are, it's a 11 by 11 matrix, and all the elements in that matrix is 0.0083. That's 1/212. 1-to-1, I mean. No. Yeah, 1-to-1. 1/1-to-1. Okay. So I'm gonna run that. So this infilter is actually do the convolution for you. Okay, so that's, you don't have to explicitly do the loop, right? So if you program in C, I was when I start to learn MATLAB and R, I want to write loops so much, like everything I want to write in a loop, right? But no, you don't, because you never write loop yourself. Okay, so in R and MATLAB, probably also in Python, because it is what they call the vectorized operation. So everything needs to be vectorized. So you got a single expression that process all the vectors or all the matrices for you. Okay. So yeah, don't if you are a C user or a Fortran user, you want to kind of suppress your intention to write loops explicitly. Okay, don't do that. All right. So and then you can see what's the effects of it. It blurs it, right? Blurs it a little bit. So this is expected because that's average filter. Low pass supposed to blur it. Okay. All right. So that's our average filter. 11 by 11, and then I'm gonna design. Not design. It's not really design. It's I call a Sobel. I got an H. H is horizontal. Okay, this one, remember Sobel got two versions. One is that, and the other is that. So I use an F special to create an H Sobel, and then for the V Sobel, I just transpose it, right? So that little tilde here, a little apostrophe here, that transpose it. All right, so I'm gonna have these two. And I go over the image twice, right? So I use, I use the H Sobel to get the results of the HE stands for H edge. Okay, the V stands for H is horizontal and V is vertical edge. Okay, so those are the two images I have, and then you can take a look at them. So one is for the horizontal edges, and one is for the vertical edges. And you can see the difference. So I'm gonna even show it. HE maze, and this is the one with the horizontal edge. Okay. And then I'm gonna call up another one. There you go. Let me show the maze. They are actually very effective, right? You see, compare those two results, right? So they are particularly effective for those vertical rails, right, on either side. You see, the rails are vertical rails, and they do not show up in the horizontal edges, right? They are all eliminated. Did you see? Right, so it's on the screen is better. So you folks in Northplat actually see it better than the folks here because you projected it. Well, you get the idea, right? So it's vertical and horizontal, and then I'm also gonna run a H log, and the log again. Log it's not directional. So it detects all directions. So it's almost like this. H log is the combination of the two Sobel filters. All right, so I'm gonna run this, and then you can see what's the result of that. So I'm gonna do a figure, the im show HVE, maze. Yeah, this is a visualization problem, and you can see. No, you don't see, right? Yeah. I don't. This is actually. I think this is probably just a visualization problem. Let me see if I can do it better. Okay, maybe add a. No, it didn't really help. Yeah. So this is what do you? Well, you can say, yeah, right. So this, this basically this gets both. Okay, so that gets and I'll share the code with you, and I can have the image. I'll post that on the website, and you can practice with yourself. Okay, see the difference. Okay, and a lot of it is really visualization, and this is really why you want max pooling in your convolutional neural network, because really if you capture a feature, so that feature is a strong signal in your result, and remember the max pooling, you pull out the max value but disregard the three other values, and the purpose is this, right? So if that is an edge, and if the gut detected a strong signal, end up with a max value, and then you extract that and then feed that to the next layer. Okay, so so max pooling. People also use average pooling, but the max pooling obviously is better because of this very reason, right? So when you detect the edges, all those edge pixels got a higher value than the neighboring pixels, and that needs to be extracted out. Okay. All right. So yeah. So that's it. And then so finally, so let me show you a very interesting thing. This is we said that let's coming back to the convolution and the correlation here. So why is convolution, right? So have you ever encountered convolution in your academic career? You do. So Ben, how do you use it? Filtering. Okay. So yes. So this is a 1D signal, right? 1D signal, right? So now so we say, all right. So here is it, right? So this is our filter, all right? Well, no, this is our mini image, 3x3. I'm gonna just use this 3x3, okay? And this is our filter. Now, when you do pixel-wise multiplication and add them together, this is actually a measure of how this mini image resembles our filter. So if they resemble much, it's gonna give you a strong signal. So that becomes correlation. Okay? So right? So if I have an image if I have an edge in my mini image, this is an edge, right? From 1 to 0 to -1. All right. Look at our vertical sawbell. So I need to get this. So this is our filter. Look at how similar they look like. They look like exactly the same, right? Almost the same. And that would, I guarantee that would give you a strong signal when you do the convolution operation. So you are actually trying to look at how this mini image is similar to your template, to your filter, right? And that's a correlation, right? So if two signals have a similarity, give you a correlation of 1, means they are perfectly correlated. They are the same, right? And so this is actually called a correlation operation, all right? And the convolution is different from correlation only in one sense. The one sense is that it's actually, so if I call this F, and if I call this G, So you already see F correlates with G, okay? Now, if F is convolute with G, strictly, you need to flip this way, flip once, and then flip it twice, and then flip that way too, okay? And so that's the only difference between correlation and the convolution. Now, sometimes when you read literature, they are exactly the same. The people use that interchangeably. They can do that because a lot of those filters are symmetrical. Now, if it's symmetrical, it doesn't matter, right? If they are symmetrical, it doesn't matter you split them or not. Okay, so you only, so they are only different if your G isn't symmetrical. But we are using a lot of symmetrical filters here. So that's the reason why they are the same. So in those cases, your convolution becomes a correlation, and a correlation is the measure of your mini image and your template, how similar they look like. All right, so does that make sense? So that kind of hopefully that would enhance your understanding a little bit. So it's not, when you're trying to do convolution or when you're trying to convolute something with your signal, your design of the filter isn't really random, right? So you choose a filter for some special purpose, and again that becomes hand engineering features, right? Because you're trying to match your filter in a way that can maximize your opportunity to see something in your signal, right? Okay, so and the convolution is really nice. So we use convolution. We use this flip because of this. The convolution got this really nice feature. So if F convolution with G convolution with H equals this association law. So that only holds if you flip it. Correlation won't. This won't. If you don't flip it, it didn't hold. Okay, so that's a nice thing about it. All right, so that's actually pretty much what I want to say today. Any comments or observations or nothing? It seems like this stuff should be intuitive. It's actually very intuitive. It's not intuitive when we get to this. When we get to the Fourier transform, then you got really lost. Then because the way that you interpret the frequency becomes so difficult when you look at the spatial. So it's you don't want to go into that. But luckily we are not. Okay. Okay. So before we go, I sent an email to everybody before the class. Maybe you haven't seen that yet. So in that class, I'm trying to clarify your class presentation. So I want to start February 12th, which is about, I think you got a random draw first to go, right? So it is completely random. So I still have it here. See, I sampled 8. So your name appears second.
Excuse me.
My red, so that's how you end up with the first one. Okay. So, you are probably the person because you are closest. So I want to ask, does that sounds okay? Okay, all right. So, first one is always the most difficult because you haven't seen how the sausage is made yet, right? The others would be a little bit, but again, we are flexible. So we should be okay. I only require the people who are officially in this class. And for those of you at North Platte, I think the technology will make it work. You can do it in your office, kind of project your, we'll have a projection here, maybe bring that on my computer, then that can be further projected to the big screen here so that everybody can see. And you just need to speak a little bit louder so that that the voice can be transmitted authentically, and then we'll go from there because I don't think the North Platte is probably the third one is North Platte. So Jared, are you the second also?
I'm
are
second.
You the second?
Yes.
You are the second. Okay, so we'll see how you go, and then we'll if it needs modification is needed, we'll do that. For those of you who are not officially in the class, you are very welcome to do one if you choose to. Okay, so I'm not going to enforce it, but I think you are a graduate student, and research is the skill to do research presentation is just a part of your life. You just need to be able to do it. So I will leave it up to you. Okay, and we can always discuss as we go along. And the paper, be really critical about it. So almost treat them not a published paper, but treat them as a manuscript. Okay, what do I mean is a lot of crappy stuff got through the peer review and published. Okay, so don't blindly just trust or believe what's in there. There could be there often be very good stuff in the peer reviewed publication, but I also see a lot of publication isn't so good. Okay, so be critical. If everything did by the authors are great, and then yes, talk about it. What's the greatest part of it? Is that the data collection is difficult, or is it the processing or the technology used for methodology being used for analysis is great, or is it the interpretation of the results is significant? Right? Great impact. That's fine. Now, if you happen to choose a paper that isn't so good and you got a lot of problems, there's a lot of opinion, maybe isn't laid out clear, or maybe this experiment is flawed, feel free to do so. Okay, so I just wanted to let you be able to have that critical mind that to do something. Okay. All right, sounds good. All right, cool. So folks saying NOSPLAT sounds good to you as well.
Good.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll see you next week then. Stay warm. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Before you
Yeah.
go, before you go,
Are you asking?